Hello, everyone. My name is Barry Coombs, and I'm CTO here at Cascade. On today's webinar, I'm joined by Ollie Restorick.
That was key for an introduction, I guess, Barry.
Yeah, good to have you on the webinar, Ollie. So a little bit of background for me. I don't know how long I've been in the IT industry now, but I've been in various different roles, helping and supporting customers with their strategy, but also kind of got end user computing and device management in my blood a little bit. I've written a few books on some now legacy VMware technology all around how to deliver the best experience to your users when it comes to the devices. Ollie, just want to give a little bit of a background as to why you're the right man on this webinar to be advising our audience on the subject today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in the industry since about the year 2000 or so, but going way back to that sort of time, I got really into deploying Windows 2000 at the time. So automating the deployments and things like that. So yeah, desktop deployment has been part of my blood for a long, long time. I wrote a utility many, many years ago to extract the serial number from the systems management BIOS and use that as a computer name. So naming of computers and things like that, just automating every detail of desktop deployment was really part of my blood. And then obviously things have changed a lot more recently. But my background, I've worked in legal for a good long amount of that time, and then came to Cascade, or Computer World as it was 10 years ago.
Fantastic. And thank you ever so much for joining today, Ollie. I mean, of everybody that has joined the webinar today, Windows 11 and certainly security, both of these topics are really big topics at the moment. And if we kind of go back, the journey that we've been on device management has been wide and varied. And if you ever want to reminisce and talk about the history of computing, Ollie is definitely your man to buy maybe a local ale and have a conversation with him around the history of computing. He can tell you about the introduction of group policy and the ways and means that have been to manage devices over the years. But lots has changed in this space, and lots has changed in the way that we're working and using technologies inside our businesses. This is resulting us needing to rethink the way that we are doing things. But Ollie, we kind of, as we get started on the content today, there's obviously a date coming up later on this year, and I won't kind of steal your thunder by talking around that. That is meaning that people are having to rethink what they're doing, and it tends to be one of two ways, doesn't it? That we're either seeing people already on Windows 11, or we are seeing people that have been holding it off and are now trying to kind of get to that date. And for me, the purpose behind this webinar is it doesn't really matter whether you're on Windows 11 or you're not. If you're already on Windows 11, there might be some content at the beginning that isn't going to be that relevant to you, but then very quickly we're going to get into where organizations should be with managing and securing Windows 11 inside your organization. We want this to be as interactive as a webinar can be. So any questions, any comments, make sure you've got those in the chat and Q&A. We've got Megan here keeping an eye on those comments to make sure that we come through to Ollie and I. But without any further ado, Ollie, do you want to pop your slides up on screen and talk to us around what's happening in October and why our audience should be caring about this date?
Absolutely. So let's just pop that out over that screen. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, we can see that.
Brilliant. I just, it's on private view. Awesome. Okay, let's go straight on to the first slide. So yeah, Barry mentioned a date, and that date is the 14th of October, 2025, which isn't that long away. We're into June now, so yeah, we've got a few months until that date. And what happens on that date is Microsoft are no longer going to support you. So if you phone up with a support query on Windows 10, you're not going to get anywhere. But more importantly than that, really, is Microsoft won't be issuing any patches for the vast majority of people. So that means your machines, if there's a zero-day vulnerability, you're not going to be able to get patched to install to protect you against that vulnerability with Windows 10. So there are
Ollie,
options. Yeah.
Windows 10, that was the last ever operating system Microsoft were going to release. So what's happened? What's the reasons behind the change? And should people care? Microsoft were pretty confident that Windows 10 would be the last one. So surely it's good enough for everyone else in the meantime, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think 2015 was when Windows 10 was released. And at the time, we all thought, that's a bit of a weird statement. You know, a Windows 10 PC is a Windows 10 PC. That was their argument. If it runs Windows 10, it runs Windows 10 forever. And you think, okay, 10, 20 years in advance, PCs are going to change a lot in that time period. How can that possibly be true? That something that can run Windows 10 in 2015 is still going to be able to run the same version of the current operating system in many, many years to come. And of course, that's not the case. So one of the driving forces really in Windows 11 was enabling some of the defaults, security defaults, that is, that people didn't turn on in Windows 10. Things like Secure Boot and things just checking the integrity of the operating system as it boots up, and introducing some new security features. So that's really what that was about. But Microsoft pretty quickly realized that as PC hardware evolves, you can't run the same operating system on the same platform.
And I think that evolution is important. And I use the word carefully because I think those that remember the Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration, in some ways it felt a little bit more revolution because there was quite a big effect on the applications. So at the time there was lots of application compatibility testing suggestions that were coming on and things like that. We don't have the same problem, but there might be a different problem with moving to Windows 11 as I understand it.
Yeah, you've potentially got drivers and things like that and hardware compatibility, but I'll come on to that in a second. But it's kind of interesting to think about how over the evolution of Windows, a Windows application pretty much could run on any version of Windows. Microsoft have always been really good at maintaining backward compatibility. Obviously, a 16-bit application isn't going to run on 64-bit Windows, so there's that sort of road hump. But yeah, Microsoft have been really, really diligent about maintaining compatibility. And one of the reasons that, or one of the things that that's resulted in is actually some of the defaults in newer operating systems being a bit slacker than where ideally you'd want them to be. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. But just to talk about that deadline. So yeah, 14th of October, you can buy extended security updates if you want to at the cost of around $61 per device for 1 year, which is going to mount up pretty quickly, and it doubles in subsequent years. So that's a pretty expensive way of maintaining updates to Windows 10. Microsoft really want you to be on Windows 11.
And I suppose the important part there, Ollie, is whilst Microsoft are offering that extended support, the third-party manufacturers, the application vendors, etc., most probably will no longer support their applications on Windows 10. So whilst you're able to get over one security hurdle, there probably are a slew of other security hurdles. So this is really meant for very large organizations that simply cannot move away for some reason that are looking to do that, and certainly not something that we would recommend people going down that route of. So let's talk about hardware then, Ollie. So we haven't got an application compatibility problem, but hardware is a bit more of a challenge with this migration.
Absolutely. So there's a few things to support primarily Secure Boot, but also storing of encryption secrets in Windows 11. Microsoft have mandated that you need a Trusted Platform Module, TPM, version 2.0. So there's an older TPM standard of 1.2. If you've got a laptop, I can guarantee it'll have either one of those TPM versions on it. More recent laptops are going to have TPM 2, so that'll be fine. But yeah, Windows 11 does require the TPM version 2. Onto desktop PCs, however, TPMs have been slightly rarer over time in desktop PCs. They are in modern desktop PCs, but slightly older ones, you might find you haven't got a TPM at all, or if you have, it's TPM 1.2. So that's a really important thing. But also processors. So Microsoft noticed that a lot of Windows blue screens were coming from certain processor combinations, processor chipset particularly. Microsoft have mandated with Windows 11 that your processor has to be on their approved list. And there's quite a long list of Qualcomm, Intel and AMD being the three vendors supported. And it looks like quite a long list, but you can look at some actually pretty decent chunky hardware. If you bought, let's say 5 years ago, a really decent PC, you might find that processor isn't on that compatibility list. So that might be a bit of a problem. The other bit is UEFI. Your machines are going to have that. That's been around for quite some time, probably 10 years or so. I'm just guessing, that sort of thing. And the other one is you need 4 gig RAM minimum. However, I wouldn't do that. If you've got 4 gig, that's not going to be a good experience with Windows, any Windows at all. But yeah, go for 8 as a minimum.
I like your statement, just don't. And for me, I think this is a point that's certainly an area that I have seen change. If I kind of go back to when I was in a role that was more responsible for end user devices in a company and things like that, trying to get the longest possible time out of a device or buy the cheapest device was very much what we were trying to do to balance budgets. I am seeing a change. I think user experience is a lot more important these days. I think also for a lot of companies, and we work with a lot of legal companies, a lot of financial companies, how it looks to the business. It kind of, if you've got people going out in front of your clients and customers, it does set an expectation of your appetite to look at innovation and hardware and things like that. So I am seeing more, as you say, I don't see anyone with 4 gig RAM these days. 8 gig is the minimum, but I'm increasingly seeing 16 gig being purchased in most devices. And for the first time ever, I am seeing 32 gig being more common in those knowledge workers, those people that are trying to do a lot more on their device. So certainly considering the personas and things like that, I don't want to give away anything that might come later, but looking at those personas, Ollie, I don't think we've got anything specifically on that. So should we talk briefly about personas?
Yeah,
so from my perspective, what I recommend when you're looking at devices, and normally there will be a number of devices that are refreshed every year, and something like a Windows 11 migration will give you probably more reason to maybe bring forward some of those migrations, take away a bit of the pain from the migration, start from a fresh start. So my recommendation is to look at the personas inside your organization. By personas, I mean desk warrior, people that sit at their desk all day, corridor warrior, those that are in or out of meetings, maybe need a flexible device, on the go professional, but someone that's kind of working from customer site to customer site, whatever they might be inside your organization, and match that to a small list of devices. I'm increasingly then seeing choice out of those devices being an option for employees. So not bring your own device, that's never really taken off, but a choose your own device. So giving people the flexibility and freedom to go and do that. And then we come on to all the next thing, that making sure the experience, that out of box experience, is really important, which I know we're coming on to later, Ollie. So we won't get into to that piece just next. But heading on from the hardware requirements, then people have quite a big investment in those end user devices. What should they do to consider their path to Windows 11 if they're not already? Or maybe some organizations are almost accidentally there, where they've been, well, not accidentally, but new devices for the last 2 or so years have been going Windows 11. Yeah. But they've now got a challenge to get the rest of their estate up to Windows 11.
Yeah, so just in terms of assessing compatibility, this is where actually having a decent asset inventory is really, really helpful. Knowing what models of PC you have explicitly is going to be really, really good. If you haven't got that, there are different ways of sort of scanning a network. If you're using Intune, which obviously we're coming on to later, you've got an inbuilt way of doing that. But there's also ways of running PowerShell scripts and things like that. But yeah, there's a PC health check app, so you could download and run that on one of each model of device, and then just tick off or cross off each model. So that's pretty good for smaller organizations. If you've got thousands of PCs, that's not going to scale very well. In endpoint analytics, there is a work from anywhere report, which can easily tell you. However, you need to enroll in that explicitly. It's not part of Intune. It's something you enroll the PCs in as well, so that might be a little bit fiddly. And you've got a PowerShell script that you could enroll with. GPO, if you've got it, you could enroll that with group policy and just gather the output files to a network share, particularly if you're an on-prem organization. And there's the Windows 11 readiness report in Intune, and that's great if you're on E3, Windows E3, Microsoft E3, or A5, A3. Notably, not Business Premium. For some reason, they've excluded Business Premium from that report.
And I think that is an important thing, and we're going to come to licensing a little bit sooner. Maybe you're on Office 365, E3 or E5, and certainly what licensing you have based upon the features and functionalities you might want to use is important. But we'll come to that a little bit later on to make sure that you fully understand the features first, and then we can match that through to some of the functionality. But good point on Business Premium there, because that is quite a common SKU that people have. And in normal circumstances, it has the majority of features that you want, but missing that one there, so you might have to choose one of those secondary options to kind of do your discovery of what you need to be doing.
Cool. So in terms of how you might go about upgrading, so if your devices are enrolled in Intune, you've got a couple of different ways. There's feature updates or update rings, 2 subtly different ways of doing that, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but that will preserve your applications and user data, so it's not going to cause the users any particular problem. They're just going to get that version of Windows in the easiest way possible, really. So if your devices aren't enrolled in Intune, you've got a couple of options there. You can wipe and reload, and that is disruptive for the users. You might deal with that certainly if you're buying new PCs into the mix. You can bring in new PCs, get an old one back, then cycle those into the users. That might be a good way of doing that. But apps are going to need to be reinstalled, so that's a really good opportunity to clear up mess. So if you've got a really unstructured environment where you've installed applications manually, potentially, you've got different versions of applications, it might be a good opportunity for you to get a fresh start and get everyone on sort of even versions. And the other option there is to enroll and upgrade. So if they're not in Intune, you can enroll them in Intune and then upgrade using the feature rings or update rings. But it's an important note there, Autopilot. So we're going to talk about Windows Autopilot in a little bit. That isn't a way to update the OS version. That's not what Autopilot does.
There's certainly some good options there. From my perspective, a strategic approach is important. So first of all, do that discovery, understand what you're going to do, correlate that discovery with the refresh cycle of those devices. Don't be putting yourself and the users under undue pressure to upgrade a device that is going to be replaced in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months is generally what we see. We see people bringing that buying cycle forward so they can get the Windows 11 migration a little bit slicker from that perspective. The next thing is then consider what is on the device and what makes that device personal to the user. Users typically have had a device for 3, 4, 5 years or more over a life period. And during that time, think of every ticket that they might have had to get a piece of software installed. Think about where their data is stored. So typically things like making sure that OneDrive is utilized in your business. And Ollie, I forget the feature, but you can redirect common folders to OneDrive. That is a useful feature.
Known folder move is the name of that feature. But yeah, really useful when you're wiping and reloading PCs, because that data and all your Internet Explorer favorites and that sort of thing, sort of Edge favorites.
Definitely, yeah. Hopefully not too much Internet Explorer left anymore, but maybe some Netscape Navigator is out there somewhere. But from that perspective, get it redirected. I think you can redirect things like your documents, your desktop. So if we just still do see those users, and I always cringe when I see this, that have icons littered across their desktop, it doesn't have to be an unsafe location anymore. That can be included in the migration quite easily.
Don't look at my desktop, Barry.
No, I will go up to it, right click and hide desktop icons, and then at least I can't see the mess there. I'm a very clean desktop person, but equally don't go into my documents folder in OneDrive because I don't believe in folders, and it is just littered with a collection. Whereas I know Megan on the webinar loves a good folder and loves a very tidy structure. So yeah, each person in their own. So Ollie, so if we have a look, so let's break this down into a few areas. We're going to come to Intune because Intune is going to be important to do those upgrades, but it's equally going to be important to be able to configure the devices. But let's kind of break it down into the chunks that I was speaking about there. So the first thing is you're going to go out and buy some new devices. And we want to make that process as easy as possible. We don't want to have to get 100 devices into IT. We don't want to have lots of manual steps. Actually, one of my first forays into being an IT professional was being given 50 laptops, given a ghost CD, and being asked to go and image a set of devices. I did it good, following step by step the first time, started making mistakes on the second time. On the third time, it was a complete mess. In the fourth time, I automated it with some scripts to go and click the buttons that needed to be done on the back end. So what is Autopilot? Is it part of Intune? I know it's not, but talk us through a little bit more as to what Autopilot is and where people should be with it, because most people I speak to know what Autopilot is, are using it in some shape or form, but certainly are not maximizing the capabilities of what is possible with Autopilot.
So yeah, really I'll say what Autopilot isn't. So Autopilot isn't that ghosting sort of imaging approach. So we're not wiping the image that the OEM provides. So if, as a parallel, if you go into Carphone Warehouse and buy a new iPhone, you don't bring that iPhone home and delete the operating system that Apple's given you. You build on top of it. And that's exactly the approach that is taken with Autopilot. So the OEM, Dell, HP, whoever it is, has given you a laptop with all the drivers on it. And if it's an Autopilot PC, they're not going to be giving you what we would call crapware. You're not going to get a trial of antivirus. You might get a trial of Office, but actually that's a really useful thing because that's all the bits and bytes of Office 365 that's going to get translated without downloading the whole Office when that comes. But yeah, you're not going to get all the utilities and demos and things that you might have that might have led you years ago to wipe a PC or want to wipe PCs. So what Autopilot does, there's a few different modes. It can allow you to ship that device directly to the end user. So perhaps they're in a remote office with no IT support. Perhaps they're a home worker. You can ship that device directly from the vendor or partner to that end user. And that's a really strong way of delivering Windows.
Fantastic. I think you've got a couple of slides on this, haven't you? Kind of breaking down. Yeah. So talk to us about that relationship between Autopilot, where that sits in terms of, I think it's part of Entra ID, isn't it? Off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's the license you need, is an Entra ID license to use it. So it's a Windows feature, but yeah, it relies on Entra ID to basically piggyback and enroll into Intune. So that's where the licensing bit comes from. But yeah, it's really about deploying that PC. Once that PC is deployed, the Autopilot relationship is done and dusted, apart from your ability then to reset the PC if you want to in future. So if the PC is being given to somebody else, you can then just reset it. back to square one.
And this is where there are levels of autopilot readiness, I suppose, from that perspective. There is the basic where you've enabled autopilot, and it's effectively getting the device into your I don't want to say network because that's an old terminology. I don't want to say domain, but registering
tenant.
it into your tenant. Yes, exactly. And I more commonly see that with people that have been dabbling with it. But there is then that relationship, that kick over to Intune with getting it customized for the user, the application deployment, and all of those kind of things, isn't there?
Yeah, you have the option. There's a thing called, we'll see this with the demo that I've got in a second, but there's a thing called the enrollment status page that guides the user through the experience. And you can dictate that the user is going to get the enrollment status page up and running until a certain set of core applications is deployed. Once those apps are down, the user can get their desktop, and then further applications can come down in the background to give the user that ability to log on before all the apps have come down, so they don't need to wait hours and hours for everything to deploy.
Makes sense. Do you want to talk to us about those different autopilot scenarios then, and what the kind of options are?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to skip forward to another slide to do that. So the one that I'm going to demo in a second is a thing called user-driven deployment. So that's where the OEM or partner ships directly to the end user. The user unboxes the device, joins it to a network, either wireless or Wi-Fi, and then logs into with their tenant credentials and takes it away from there. That's a pretty common one. That's probably the most common. The other ones are a self-deploying mode. So that's actually where there's no keystrokes involved. It just comes up onto a wired network and will just deploy itself for a kiosk. And the other one is a thing called Autopilot for pre-provision deployment, which is why everyone still calls it by its old name, which is white glove. And for that context, think about somebody taking a PC out of the box with their gloves on, not smearing crisps all over the screen, etc., preparing that laptop or device for the end user and then giving it to them. But at that point, they've got the applications deployed, and the user just has to log in. At that point, they don't have to go through the sort of half an hour or so process of regular autopilot. And the other scenario is autopilot reset, and that's preparing a device for a new user without fully wiping it. Little note there, not for hybrid devices. So if it's joined to both on-prem and Entra, autopilot reset isn't going to work. You're going to need to find another way, which we can talk about. But that is there.
Makes sense. So you've got a number of different options there to go and do that. We see more people moving towards the white glove. People desire to be on that self-service, but the white glove is where we see people, typically because there are some stubborn applications that are left, again, in legal and accountancy and other people. There tends to be applications that are pivotal to the way the business works, but maybe have some idiosyncrasies with add-ins, plugins that maybe don't always deploy in the easiest possible way. But I think it is very good. That white glove, I wouldn't be ashamed to actually ask your IT staff that are doing this to wear gloves. This isn't uncommon from this perspective. And certainly what we are seeing in the bigger companies is the experience of that unboxing is being taken very seriously. It's an extension of onboarding. It's kind of a relationship to that kind of culture of your organization. And we are seeing people even up in their game. So the laptop is then placed into a box with a company mug or a hoodie or something like that, and really making an event of a new device being delivered, certainly to a new employee, but even kind of looking at that kind of new device out to an existing employee. They've probably had that device, if they've had it from new, for 3 to 5 years. So it is a bit of a celebration, a nice new device, a nice new experience, and let's maximize that investment for the business to make sure it has the full impact. So Ollie, we've spoken a lot to now. Do you want to move to your demo? Is that the best place that we go
absolutely.
now?
Absolutely. So this is the sorry, I'm just checking that the video is running. I'm sorry, just want to talk over that. Awesome. So this is what it looks like for an end user when using the user-driven deployment mode. So the device has been shipped to the user. It's arrived by courier. They've unboxed it. And in this case, that's actually, this demo is recorded on a VM. So it's plugged into a network implicitly. But one of the first steps on our laptop is going to be to join the wireless network, which we don't see in this demo. Also, I have cut out a few segments of this. This process would take about probably half an hour. And we don't want to sit and watch half an hour's worth of video. So obviously I've sped it up and cut bits out. But let's have a look. So the first thing is choosing the keyboard layout. That's probably pretty important, so they can enter their password with the right keyboard layout. And no, we don't want a second layout. So it's checking for updates. What it's also doing at this point, and I'll just pause it, The way it's working under the hood, in this scenario, there is another autopilot scenario, but in this scenario, we've captured what's called a hardware hash, and that's a big long number, 4 kilobytes long, that uniquely represents that device. So what is happening here is setup is computing that hardware hash and extracting it and sending it up to Microsoft, who's then going to match it and say, actually, this isn't a regular PC. This isn't autopilot PCs we're doing. So the bits and bytes that are on the disk are actually plain standard Windows. There's nothing special about an autopilot PC apart from that hardware hash has been captured and put into a tenant. So there isn't an special autopilot build of Windows or anything like that. So at this point, it's realized that this is actually an autopilot scenario and what we're going to get after a reboot.
Your Hyper-V logo there, Ollie, would be Dell or whatever. This is because
it would. Sorry, yes, it would. Yeah. Yeah, I should have faked that on the video really and stuck a Dell logo over it, but I didn't. Okay, so yeah, it's realized that this is actually a Windows autopilot build. Sorry, a Windows autopilot scenario, I should say. And it's going to then drop us into a login page. So what we have here, I'll just pause it again, is branded. So this is Define Tomorrow. This is our Define Tomorrow seminar and demo branding. And yeah, you have that sort of branded login page for the user to log in with the credentials they know for Office 365. So that's their email address and their credentials. Let's just sign in.
Is your alter ego Richie James, is it?
Yeah, it is. Okay. And we have to clear MFA at this point, but that is done.
Good example of what's the word, kind of security as standard kind of thing. We're not having a device that is there that we're able to get onto and then joining it to a domain. We're straight away, before we're even in the device, it's getting to a point where you're putting the MFA token in to authenticate.
Absolutely. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the enrollment status page. You don't have to open up the little bits here, but just to see what's going on, it's doing a few different steps of the process. So mostly that's completed. And I've skipped the video on a little bit so we don't see all of these. But, yeah, this is probably the bulk of what the user will see. It's just, waiting for the device to be set up properly. Things like enrolling it into Intune happens at this point. Starting off the process of BitLockering the disk, that will happen, and then the the key will be stored in Entra ID. And steps like
another great example from that security perspective, the fact that we're talking about BitLocker being applied straight away as per the policy and that key being stored somewhere. So if there ever is a challenge, you can do something about that.
So without an administrator having to remember to do it, it's there by default, secure by default. Just move that on a bit. Okay, so we've set up here Windows Hello. So this is Windows Hello convenience pin. Just logging in again. So yeah, move this along a little bit. Set up a pin. It's all very nice. Set. After doing that, come on, I can do it. There we go. The user's then got a desktop and they're logged in and they have their application, so they have a copy of Office down on the PC. So that's what it looks like for the end user. So without any IT involvement, without having to buy batches of 20, 30 PCs, stick them in the basement for a bit and wait for an IT person to get around to deploying them, that device can go straight to the end user and the user can be productive.
Definitely. So I think that was really good there. And I think that shows why there are options. That's not going to be for every user. Maybe those that are a little bit more technophobe, someone that will pass their iPhone to their partner to be configured when they get a new iPhone, might not like that experience. And IT can do that with the white glove for some users, or if you want to provide that tailored service, you could do that inside IT. But equally, for more tech savvy users, and it's not particularly technical, but you've got to be comfortable with the process. It can get shipped straight out. We can get to the point of a device in front of a user a lot quicker. Certainly, if there's someone that's got challenges that are not near the office, shipping a device directly from someone like like Dell or Microsoft to that user will be important. So Ollie, before we move on to kind of the second part of this, because Intune plays a pivotal role in making that successful, you mentioned something around whether you're hybrid or not. Can you just kind of dig into that a little bit more? Because again, this is an area where I see people might be configured in one way today, but actually they might be able to move to the other way based upon changes that have happened since they made that initial decision.
Yeah, so a lot of organizations are going to have Active Directory. If you're in the sort of situation where it's a brand new business and you haven't got any of that legacy stuff, you might already be just natively cloud, natively Entra ID, which is a lovely place to be. But for the majority of organizations, you might have an element of Active Directory in place. And that might be driven by a legacy application potentially that's bound to Active Directory and very, very difficult to move away from. And it might just be lots of them, lots of applications, just a lot of work. I always encourage people when I'm having these conversations to think, are you within shooting distance of getting rid of AD? Are you in shooting distance of a sort of midpoint, which I'm going to describe here, of joining your PC to Entra ID only and not having AD joined, but maybe AD is there in the background? So there's a couple of different join options. So you could do hybrid join, and that's where the PC is joined both to Active Directory on-prem and Entra ID, or you can be just cloud joined with Entra ID. There's a few different pros and cons. So with hybrid join, obviously you can easily access on-prem applications, data, file and print servers. That said, a lot of organizations are choosing now to join their PCs when they go through this Autopilot and Intune route, join the PCs only to Entra ID. They still have an AD in the background. And it may just be that saving the password the first time they enter it is sufficient, which Windows will do quite nicely and work pretty well, particularly if users are rarely in the office, things like printing and things like that occasionally. That could be a really good approach. There is also a thing called Cloud Kerberos Trust. And what that does, there's an agent that gets placed on-prem in the environment. And what it's basically doing is stuffing the tokens into Windows in the right place so that it presents it and convinces an on-prem AD that it is actually domain joined without being domain joined. So there is a halfway house and a few different options here in terms of that. But in terms of some of the limitations you get, machine naming options, you don't get with hybrid join. You're just going to get whatever name the connector chooses to give you. And that'll just be a sequential number. That's one of the things, main things.
Brilliant. So certainly some considerations there. And around hybrid join, there tends to be a lot of conversation around VPN, Ollie. A little bit of a curveball here, but can you talk us around, is a VPN required, and generally what your recommendation would be if that is required?
Yeah, so if you're doing Autopilot and if you need a hybrid join, if the PCs are on-prem, that's absolutely fine. There's no other further things need to be done there. If you choose to allow Autopilot to be built remotely from people's homes or from remote offices that don't have a direct VPN into a main office, you do need to think there about how users can log into Windows for the first time. So the domain join actually happens in the background. That's very, very seamless. However, if you're hybrid joined, the first time that user needs to log on, they need line of sight to a domain controller, and the way they're going to get access to that is through a VPN. So there's a few steps and a few complexities. Microsoft have, I think I've got 7 different VPN providers that they've tested and said this is a validated solution for VPNs. That's not to say that all a plethora of other VPNs won't work. Those are the ones that Microsoft have tested with, but it's a little bit fiddly. If you can get to the point where you're Entra ID joined only, it makes things a lot simpler.
Definitely. So I think certainly looking at your domain, looking at group policy, which brings us nicely into Intune in a moment, is going to be important, because you should be moving away from group policy, and I do still see group policy being leveraged a lot inside organizations. Recently, working with a customer, their login time took about 2.5 minutes due to group policy being deployed on there. This isn't the way we should be working today. So Ollie, talk to us about Intune. This is the other half of this relationship. This is what makes all of this possible, really. So lots of people that I speak to with Intune, again, some are dabbling with it, some go, that isn't that the thing to manage mobile phones? What is Intune, and what can we and should we be doing with it?
Yeah, so Intune can obviously manage mobile phones as well. So we're talking iOS, Android, Mac OS as well, and obviously Windows. But obviously there's a Windows seminar, so I'm focusing on the features here on Windows. But in terms of features of Intune, so it's got compliance policies. So that's all about measuring whether a device is compliant or not. Has it got BitLocker on it? Is it the right version? Have you got a minimum OS version? Is there antivirus? Is there all sorts of different things that you need to check for compliance? And once that's done, your device will be deemed either compliant or not, and you'll get a nice list in Intune of red for non-compliant, green for for compliant, which is really, really good. You have configuration policies as well, which allow you to apply settings and restrictions to devices. So a whole bag of different settings. And people will say, when they're comparing that to GPO, actually Intune has got fewer settings out the box compared to GPO. And Microsoft will say that's a good thing. I would agree with them. Because if you think back to your sort of 2000s administrator, you're all about locking things down. You're taking menu items away from things, lots and lots of different things, probably done back in the day in the name of security, but really just hiding things from the users. And probably back in the day, you're giving users admin rights, all sorts of horrible things as well. But the settings that are there by default in Intune are really focused towards making things nice and easy for security, like say BitLocker. Really nice few tick boxes there to just enroll the device, make the device disk BitLockered, and put the key into AD in very, very few simple steps. We also have reporting features, so you can identify issues, be proactive, and application deployment is a really key one there. If you're deploying apps either manually, there's a really good opportunity there for you to introduce those apps into Intune, let Intune do all the hard work of deploying them. If they're deployed by GPO, probably you've done the hard work in automating the application and knowing for that particular application what the command line switches might be for the app, etc. But you might equally take the opportunity to update the version of that application as well if you're refactoring it. So that might be a good thing. And we also have monitoring of devices right the way through the lifecycle.
So we've got a few things here to jump into, Ollie. Let's start in the order of frustration in my head. So have imported their GPOs into Intune. Now, from my perspective, this is akin to using Microsoft Word to build your website. Just because it is possible, it certainly isn't the recommended way to do it, and I just wouldn't do it, if I'm honest with you. Back to your memory, you don't put 4 gig in a Windows 11 laptop, just don't do it, kind of thing. Talk to me about that, around what are your thoughts on it? Do you agree with me, or is it a perfectly good way of doing it? And secondly, if it's not a good idea, does it have its uses during this process?
It does have its uses. So yeah, I'd say it's not a good idea just to blindly import all your GPOs into Intune. But there is a tool that will just look at your GPOs and see where there is alignment between settings that are available in GPO and settings that are available out the box in Intune. So it is true, any registry-based GPO policy, remember that there's some extensions and things like that, but the majority of settings are registry-based ones. Any of those can be imported into Intune should you need it, especially if you've extended that GPO for a particular application and you put in the ADMX file. To make that happen, you can do the equivalent quite easily with Intune. But to your point about that tool, I would use that to look and see what you've got rather than to actually do it. So when I talk to a lot of customers around GPOs, they probably had that 20 years quite easily. You know, Windows 2000 had GPOs that came out around the year 2000. We're 25 years into having GPOs around. Some organizations have 25 years worth of rubbish in their GPOs, and very often, or look at a GPO, set of GPOs with a customer, and they'll go, oh, yeah, I don't know what that is. That was somebody who's left 10 years ago, and we just don't dare touch it. So really, you don't want to be pulling all that into your Intune environment. You want to be sort of drawing a line and just moving on and implementing maybe the spirit of what you're doing. And the other point to that is 25 years ago, the business needs were very, very different. So if you're sort of looking at a GPO, saying what was the business reason for putting that in, the business reason will have changed. People working remotely, people working very, very differently now to how they did.
Definitely. So it does have its use case. I mean, I used to work for a software house, and it was legacy in the nature of me working there 15 plus years ago. But we used to have applications that had config files and things like that, where there are registry entries that have to be put in by legacy pieces of software. I'm guessing that's probably one of the ways you could do it scripting and things like that as well inside of Intune. So the second point, and I think there's a point here. Compliance policy should have a matching configuration policy, if I remembered that correctly.
Yeah, so let's say you're insisting with a compliance policy that your users have, let's say, a 14-character password. That'd be a pretty decent thing. What you shouldn't be doing there is having a configuration policy to insist that their password on their device is 12 characters. That's a mismatch. So yeah, they should be aligned wherever possible. Things with BitLocker, you know, if you're insisting with your compliance policy that the device is BitLockered, I would make sure with a configuration policy rather, that you are BitLockering the device. So yeah, they should be aligned from that perspective.
Makes sense. So talk to us around some good practice around this, Ollie. What does good practice inside Intune look like?
Yeah, so very often we see people when they start playing around with Intune, they'll think, okay, we're just doing this on a few test devices. Let's make a group of those test devices and apply my policies to those. And very, very quickly, if you follow that down its logical sort of conclusion, you end up with lots of groups where you'll potentially miss targeting things. So let's say you have a compliance policy that targets Windows, and you've got the same need across your whole Windows environment. Just target that at all devices. It's not going to do anything if it's not a Windows device. Same happens with a compliance with a configuration policy. Just keep it as wide as possible. If you need, obviously, to segment things by group, do that. But for the most part, make sure you're covering all your devices and all your users with that. So the other next point, it's a feature called conditional access. This is an Entra feature. And if you've got one of the higher licenses in 365, you have this. We'll come on to licensing later. But conditional access allows you to gate access to 365 resources and actually third-party resources as well, based on certain attributes like have they cleared MFA, and importantly, is the device compliant? So you can create a conditional access policy that insists if you're going to get access to 365 data, you're going to do that from a device that's registered in Intune and is compliant with the policy, which is a really, really strong security stance to be able to do that. And then anyone, attacker hopefully doesn't have a device registered in your tenant that's compliant with the policy and won't be able to access any data, even if they manage to compromise your credentials. So the other one, compliance policies. So compliance policies measure the state of the device. If a device falls out of compliance, particularly if you've turned on that conditional access policy, you're going to want to give that user a bit of a grace period before their device falls off, doesn't get access to 365 anymore. So very often when we look at compliance policies, we see the workflow when they fall out of compliance is just to mark it non-compliant immediately. What you should do is notify the user and the help desk pretty quickly. Then like a few days later, maybe another reminder, and then a couple of days after that, you say, right, we're going to actually mark it non-compliant, and the user's not going to get any access to that. Finally, so there is a feature called device platform restrictions. So by default, Intune is very, very open. And it will actually allow users to enroll any type of device. So they could enroll a Windows BYOD device, which you do not want. Let's say you've chosen that you haven't got any macOS devices, you don't want people to enroll macOS. You should go in there and actually create a device platform restriction that says, if you're doing if you're using one of these platforms that we don't want you to use, you're not going to be able to enroll. So that's a really important thing. There's quite a bit of sort of quite open by default in Intune, which we'll come on to in a second.
Brilliant. So some really good advice there. Certainly things like conditional access, that should be part of your Microsoft 365 configuration now. We're seeing Microsoft 365 as one of the most targeted platforms when it comes to threats. So making sure that you configured it right, make sure you considered your BYOD policy, make sure you're getting the right mix between flexibility and security, because we don't want to lock something down so much that users go and use something to go and do work themselves. They go and start using non-work devices and applications because it's just too difficult to do the work they want. But Ollie, just in terms of time, let's move on to the bad examples, and there's so many of them from that environment. Megan, I think we've got a question. Do you just want to read out that question to Ollie before we move on?
Yeah, of course. It says, does Microsoft provide a sandbox environment for you to perform isolated testing for Intune?
No, is the easy answer to that. There is a feature, and what is that feature called? It's tagging. So there's a thing called tagging, where you can tag devices with, let's say, a test thing. It's really designed, that feature, for, let's say you've got a USA office and a UK office, and you don't want the UK people to affect USA devices and vice versa. You could tag each device with USA or UK, and then each administrator would have that either UK or USA tag, and they could influence that. So you could do that, but no, it doesn't really sandbox it. Yeah, you could do that feature, actually. You could. But yeah, a little bit clunky. But yeah, there's nothing in terms of sandbox. Probably what you're better off doing if you really want to test without being destructive is to just fire up a new tenant, do your testing in a new tenant.
And I think having a second tenant, 2 free licenses in Business Premium test next to nothing, gives your IT team a sandbox to go and play with. Obviously, there can be some challenges in terms of syncing, which we've potentially got a product coming out later on in the year that would help you keep your baselines the same between two tenants potentially. So Ollie, we haven't got enough time to go through all the bad practices in Intune, right? This is a very complex thing, but you've picked a couple of common gotchas that you often see.
Absolutely. So yeah, by default, there's a setting. I'd advise you that take a screenshot of this. If you haven't deployed Intune at all, you're probably best to just go off and change the setting right now, because there's going to be no impact. If you're in a live environment, you're going to want to think about making that switch, but there's a report there. But what this policy is, it says mark devices with no compliance policy assigned as compliant. So if you've chosen, or by accident decided you've not managed to deploy a compliance policy to every device, those devices that haven't got a compliance policy assigned are just going to be lit up green, and you'll have measured nothing about them. So they could have no AV, no device encryption, password could be too short, whatever, and it's just going to show green in your tenant by virtue of that setting being there. So yeah, if you're a brand new tenant, just flip that into mark devices as not compliant. If you have devices enrolled, there's a report, and if you go through the reporting, there's a report for devices with no compliance policy assigned. Run that report and just see what's there. Go and rectify them. Then when you're happy that you've got no devices in that category, flip that switch across. But yeah, that's a bad default from Microsoft, in my opinion. Next, we have an even worse default. So this is over an Entra ID. So it's not really Intune, but I always make this point. Anytime I'm talking to somebody, have a look at this one. So this default in Entra ID is to allow user consent for apps. So it's saying basically any user can consent to any third-party application to go and read data from that application. It doesn't even use the user's login. It's not using MFA, things like that. It is just coming straight in and potentially reading your SharePoint, OneDrive data and your email from any application that they consent to. So the best setting there is really do not allow user consent, the top one. There's a middle one that says, verify publishers for selected permissions. And actually, it's not too bad to have that. But the setting you do not want is the bottom one. We move on to licensing.
Yeah, so I think from a licensing perspective, just in terms of time, ultimately, you need to make sure you've got the higher SKU. So certainly if you're on the Office 365 SKU, so Office 365 E3 or E5, you're generally getting the productivity tools with a limited amount of management around it. So we're seeing most customers now either moving from business standard to business premium, or Office 365 E3 or E5 to Microsoft 365 E3 or E5. I think in terms of time, Ollie, the best bet is if people have questions around the licensing, please reach out to us. We'll more than happily do that. Be aware from a CSP perspective, you can now swap your providers mid-year, so we can make sure that we're able to review what licensing would be best and work for you. Equally, if you do decide to bring your licensing to Cascade, you will get free access for every member of your company to our Adopt 365 training platform. So maybe we can give you a little bit bang for the buck. Don't pay any more money, get some real strategic advice, and get access to that platform for every member of your staff. So let's move on, Molly. I think the next thing was around just a discussion around Defender for Endpoint, wasn't it? And where that kind of fills a gap.
It is, yeah. So in terms of Defender for Endpoint Plan 1, so the sort of reactive features, the manual response actions and things like that, that is included in a lot of the SKUs there. The proactive bit is included in Defender for Endpoint. So you may have other AV providers, Bitdefender being a sort of prominent one, that have a pretty large overlap there. But we're seeing a lot of people saying, look, we're paying for Defender for Endpoint Plan 1, certainly in the SKU. Why don't we have our antivirus with Microsoft? And there's a few different things it can do, purely because the mailbox potentially and the Defender for Endpoint are in the same place. So things like quarantining of emails and then actually updating the email and then releasing it is actually pretty smart when it's integrated nicely with Microsoft. So there's a few different options around that.
So I think it's just worth considering what is your complete security stack, isn't it, here? From this perspective, Defender for Endpoint is a fantastic tool. It is very good. It is well respected in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, but think about how the endpoint, the antivirus piece, is going to link with those different components in your security stack. Lots of companies are thinking about things like managed detection and response. Maybe you don't have a large team, a large security team, and you need that external support. So this is where Defender for Endpoint is highly recommended by us, certainly if you're pushing on with Intune and Autopilot. But think about where it interlocks with the rest of the security stack. And this is where things like Bitdefender, a platform approach, does still have a play. Or if you're using Defender for Endpoint, you could link it up with something like an Arctic Wolf managed detection and response service as well. Ollie, apologies if you mentioned it a moment ago. There is a difference to consider as well, isn't there, between Endpoint Plan 1 and Plan 2? And we were talking around the EDR piece, weren't we, around that kind of extended detection and response?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, more the proactive things and the automation and things like that are coming in the Plan 2, but the basic stuff is in Plan 1. And we should also make it clear, Defender for Endpoint is different from Microsoft Defender or Windows Defender, as you might have known it. That's the basic antivirus that ships with everything. This is actually adding a few more features on and integrating nicely into 365.
And I think it's safe to say, if you're comparing it to most third-party solutions, that Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 probably, I mean, it's definitely got more than lots of those solutions, but that EDR bit on the endpoint device is what we see as standard in most antivirus solutions these days. So how do you get Endpoint Plan 2? Do you have to upgrade to the complete E5 SKU or something, or can you get a bolt-on to the E3?
Yeah, there's a bolt-on. That's probably the most cost-effective way for most people to do it. Is to they've got the Plan 1 in the base license if you've got Microsoft 365 of some description, and then you just bolt on the Endpoint Plan 2.
Brilliant. So you had something around security baselines that I think you wanted to show us.
Do that. Yeah, let me just stop sharing that. Over there. Make sure I share the right window. Bear with. So hopefully you can see that. So this is one of the features in Defender for Endpoint. So within endpoint security, there we go. In security baselines, there's a pretty nice feature here if it's going to load. Loaded this morning.
Whether the demo gods are with us, isn't it? Sometimes we lose our patience.
There we go. So we have security baselines for Windows 10 and later, which is the one of interest there. So if we then create a policy and just click through this wizard, so let's call that test for now. Microsoft have bundled together a set of recommended settings. So going back to what I was saying about backward compatibility being really important for Microsoft, they are often very conservative about sort of advancing security features and pushing things forward. So here is a huge, great long list of settings that Microsoft recommend as being really good things from a security perspective to put on. You know, if you're a brand new tenant, if you've got no machines left, no machines in your tenant, go ahead and switch this on. That'll be a nice sort of baseline to then start building upon. However, if you've got any number of machines really and applications installed, you would be pretty crazy just to go and click and just create this policy. You want to do some testing of these individually. So there's lots and lots of different things here. Unfortunately, this is a all or nothing kind of thing here. Somebody very clever online has gone and extracted the JSON files from here and then made the JSON files available for each of these different things, so you can put those into individual configuration policies and deploy those individually and test them to limited groups and things like that. But that's a really good thing to do. So yeah.
And that's it. And I think when I've looked in that kind of all or nothing was the challenge when I was talking to some customers about it. So certainly do some testing. We spoke about kind of having a bit of a trial tenant and things like that. So I think as we're kind of coming towards the end, the last subject was patching, which we'll just talk about here, Ollie, I think. But if you could put the slide deck back up so we can also put the last slide on the screen now. Absolutely. So one of the things to be considering when you are looking at your life cycle of your devices, and certainly around the security, is patching. We still see patching as one of the most common ways people's machines end up being exploited. And there are a number of different ways to be patching your devices. Quite commonly, we still see the likes of WSUS, Windows Server Update Services, being deployed. Intune equally has the ability to patch and maintain devices. The challenges with both of these is they're really designed to look after the Windows device and the Microsoft applications, and they're actually very good at that. And certainly if you've got nothing else, please configure those, because it's certainly better than not having anything else. The challenge is the third-party applications, the applications that are often targeted, are normally not included. And whilst Microsoft does have some limited services that I believe you can pay for third-party applications, they are extremely limited in the applications they are supporting from that perspective. So we do recommend looking at a third-party patching solution. Look at one that patches a large amount of the applications, and look at your patching schedule. How are you patching devices? How are you reporting upon it? Certainly, if you're part of Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, you're going to need to be able to prove that you are applying patching within a timely manner. I think it's within a 2-week period at worst case from that perspective. So this is something that we recommend having a look at. We do run a service called Cascade Patch. I think there's well over 200 third-party applications that are included. With inside of that, we will run a regular patching schedule for you. I believe it's on a weekly basis, and we will give you a set of reporting to keep on top of that. So it removes that headache around patching, not just your desktops, but remember your servers also need to be patched as well. Ollie, I don't know if there's anything else on the patching before we then do that final wrap up.
No, probably just really to point out that Intune doesn't do patching of servers. So Intune is purely a client-side device. So yeah.
You certainly will need to consider that. Obviously, I believe if you've got your servers running in Azure and you've been using templates from there, are some options that Microsoft will be maintaining those templates for you. But yeah, definitely patching needs to be reviewed. We see so few organizations getting this right. And whenever we do see large scale attacks, we do see something being unpatched as being one of the most common areas. So Ollie, move us on to the last slide. I hope everybody that has joined this webinar has been able to find something that has stood out for you today. Hopefully it has helped you plan what you might need to be looking into next in your journey for improving that experience for your users, but ultimately making sure that it's done so inside a digital fortress of security that you're able to manage and maintain for your organization. As you've probably been able to see, Ollie is infinite wisdom when it comes to all of these subjects. And we really do encourage you that if you're on this journey, or maybe you think you're there, but maybe you've heard some stuff that's making you question whether you've got it right, book a free modern management and security workshop with Ollie. We will go through where you are today, where you'd like to get to, and we can help you break this into bite-sized chunks that will fit within inside your budget, your timescale, whatever it is that you're looking at. Also, please remember that Cascade is a specialist Microsoft Cloud MSP. And as such, we are here to help you with all of your Microsoft services. But equally, we've been selling end user devices for well over 30 years now. So we have the best pricing from all of the major manufacturers. If you're looking to do a refresh of your endpoint devices, come to us. Test us. Let's see if we can beat the pricing from where you're getting it today. And we can do that even up against the manufacturers direct. We have such a good relationship. So I do hope you've enjoyed the webinar. I hope you don't mind a little bit of an advert at the end here. But ultimately, we want to be creating a relationship with you. We want to be helping you advise you on your strategy. We want to support you inside implementing it. So hopefully you found it useful. Ollie, thank you ever so much for creating all the content for today and sharing your wisdom. We really do appreciate it, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.